Hello folks, it's Brad and Jay and we're in Rome. Today we're going to meet a very interesting couple named John and Elise Allen. They love the Roman food, but not only do they like to eat it, they like to make it. And today we're going to join them as they prepare one of Rome's favorite dishes. So here we are on the terrace of the home of John Allen, who's going to cook one of Rome's fab-four dishes for us. But first, let's get to know John a little bit. John, tell me what you do.
Well, I'm what the Italians would call a Vaticanista, which means I'm a journalist whose full-time professional work is covering the Vatican. So I'm kind of a White House beat reporter in the same way you would have, or I'm sorry, I'm a Vatican beat reporter in the same way you would have White House beat reporters and so on.
You've really come to love Rome and immerse yourself into it completely, including the food and including the preparation of the food. We mentioned the Fab-Four. What are the Fab-Four dishes, and which one are we going to do today?
All right, well, one of the things to know about Italian cooking is that it reflects the history of Italy and that it's marked by strong regional differences. So Italy's only been a unified country since 1870. Most Italians don't think of themselves as Italian. They would think of themselves as Laziale, meaning they come from Lazio, or Marchigiano, they come from Le Marche, or whatever. And so each region has its celebrated cuisine. In the region of Lazio, which is the region around Rome, Lazio is known for its pastas, and in particular these four pasta dishes that are just classic. If you grow up here, you eat these things from day one, and you're passionately devoted to them. And those are there's spaghetti alla carbonara, there is cacio e pepe, there is la gricia, and there is Bucatini al Amatriciana. Amatriciana is my personal favorite, and that is what we are making today.
I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. Your shirt is relevant here, correct?
Yes, that's right. The ingredients in Amatriciana are hallowed by time, sacrosanct, and absolutely beyond discussion or debate. There are 5 of them, and in case I ever get stumped, they are helpfully listed on my t-shirt. So we have the Bucatini, which is the kind of pasta we use. It's a thick, long pasta with a hole in the middle. The Italian word for hole is buco, hence Bucatini. And the idea is it traps the sauce in the middle of the pasta and gives you a more flavorful experience. Pecorino, which is the particular kind of cheese. Pecora in Italian is sheep, so it's cheese made from sheep's milk. It was invented here in Lazio by shepherds out in the hills. Guanciale, which is a particular slice of pork. Guancia is cheek in Italian, so it's cut from the cheek of the pig. Very rich, flavorful taste. Peperoncino is the red peppers, spicy red peppers, and then pomodoro is tomato. Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the history of this dish?
Sure. So this, by tradition, and I don't know if this is true or not, but as the Italians say, "Se non è vero è ben trovato," meaning if it's not true, it sounds great. So the tradition is that this dish was born in a small village about 40 miles south of here, still in Lazio, called Amatrice. Americans might have heard of it because a couple of years ago there was a terrible earthquake that just basically wiped the whole place out. But in any event, that's where this dish comes from. And it originated actually as what the Italians, what people from Lazio call la gricia, which is basically just the guanciale, the cheese, and the pasta, because it developed before the tomato was introduced in Europe. The tomato wasn't introduced in Europe until about the 17th century, but we know this dish existed several centuries before that. But in Amatrice, that's where they introduced the tomato to it, making it Amatriciana. And people loved it so much that cooks from Amatrice actually in the late 18th century earned the privilege of being the exclusive cooks in the papal household. So I like to say it is incalculable the number of decisions affecting the fate of the Catholic Church that have been made over a plate of Amatriciana. I mean, it is, in a sense, it is the dish of popes. It's the church's dish.
All right, let's get started.
Let's get cooking.
So, John, what are we doing here?
Well, what I'm doing first is putting in little pieces of fat from the guanciale before we put in the meaty parts. And the idea is I want to get a nice layer of grease from the guanciale into the skillet before I add olive oil and I add the meaty part of the guanciale, which is what will actually be in the sauce. I use an aluminum skillet because one of the things that will happen during the cooking process is that little bits of the guanciale will stick to it. And then later on, when we put in a little bit of white wine and allow the alcohol from it to cook off, it will suck in all those little bits of guanciale and just give a richer flavor to the sauce when we're done.
What are some mistakes that rookies make and shortcuts that tourist restaurants would take that make it a less desirable version?
Well, the main thing that touristy restaurants will do is they will use poor cuts of guanciale and they will use store-bought pecorino cheese. And so it just gives a kind of industrial flavor to the whole thing. You want to make sure that the trick to this dish clearly is the guanciale. I know in the States it can be a little bit difficult to obtain. You can't just go down to the supermarket to get it. But what I would recommend, there are a number of online sort of specialty meats services. And you can get authentic guanciale. And what you want is the guanciale Amatriciana. The guanciale from Amatrice. There are 2 or 3 different kinds of guanciale, but for this dish, you want the original. Good thing about guanciale is that it keeps a very, very long time. Because it was, this particular cut, it was carried around by shepherds up in the hills of Lazio. They had to be able to stick it into a backpack and maybe use it a week later, so it's heavily preserved. On one side, it's got a thick, fatty layer, and the other, there is pepper rind, which is what keeps it good to go and preserves it. What you want to make sure you do is cut both of those things off before you start using it. So the other thing touristy restaurants will do is that they'll have a big vat of Amatriciana in the back, and it'll have just been sitting there all morning, and then when you order it, they will scoop it into a bowl, slap it into a microwave, and then bring it to your table. And it's like, you're eating something you took a plastic lid off of. You don't want that. On the other hand, the nice thing about the city of Rome is that people here know their Amatriciana. They will not put up with that. And so, ask around. People will tell you where you can find the best versions of the Amatriciana. Although, in my opinion, there's nothing that's ever quite as good as the Amatriciana you make at home that comes right out of the skillet when you're done. Well, you'll see, Bradley, it is something to behold. We are at the critical phase. We have taken out the fat from the middle, which obviously cooked down and left a nice layer of grease in the skillet. We have now put in the meaty bits. And because the guanciale is what gives Amatriciana its flavor, it is the whole ball game right here. Roman cooks will argue endlessly over technique. Like, first of all, how do you cut them? Do you want larger chunks? Do you want smaller? Do you want thick? Do you want thin? I end up going with a somewhat short and thin sort of piece because I find that just gives the best cooking experience. Next issue, how cooked do you want the guanciale to be? Do you want it to be still a little bit on the rare side, so it's a little chewier? Do you want it to be fairly thoroughly cooked but not burnt? Do you actually want it crispy? And this is another point around which there are endless arguments. And then the mother of all debates, at what point do you interrupt the cooking of the guanciale to put in the white wine? To do the little sort of what the Italians would call a sfumatura, which literally means giving the guanciale nuance. Sfumatura means a nuance.
Where do you fall on that?
I am a fairly thoroughly cooked guy, but not crispy guy. Yeah. Because the whole point here is you want the sauce that you end up with to have as robust a flavor as possible. And if you cook the guanciale until it's crispy, you're actually cooking off some of the grease that gives it the flavor.
All right, John, I understand we're going to get some sizzle here. What is it?
So this is what the Italians call a sfumatura, which literally means nuance. We're going to add a little nuance to the Amatriciana by pouring some white wine over it and then letting the alcohol cook off. We're using Frascati Superiore because that is the one and only wine that Amatrice officially recommends should accompany this dish. So we're practicing the true religion here today.
Wow, I have to tell you folks, I'll be glad when they invent cameras that can record the sense of smell.
Yeah, right?
Because this smells great.
All right, so what will happen now is this will cook off for a few moments. And then we are going to add the sugo di pomodoro, the spaghetti sauce. And again, this did not come out of a bottle. These basically were on the vine as of 2 days ago. I got them from a farmer's market and prepared the sauce yesterday. And then it will simmer for about a half hour. And in the meantime, we will get ready to make the pasta. We'll start the water boiling. And then, Bradley, the good news is, we'll eat. As you can see, the alcohol from the wine is cooked off. We're left with a really nice cream that is a mix of the tannin from the wines, the grease from the guanciale. And we're going to add a little bit of olive oil to round out the ensemble. And then what we are going to do is we are going to add the tomato sauce. And this is another big debate among people who cook Amatriciana. How much tomato sauce should you add? The school of thought among most Italian cooks is that you want the sauce for Amatriciana to be what they would call abbondante, abundant. So this isn't one of those pastas where you just want a little bit of sauce. You want this thing to be basically swimming in sauce. So we are giving it a nice, generous application. Something like that. And then you use your trusty wooden spoon, which is every cook's salvation, every cook's lifeline. No kitchen should be without it. And we're just going to do several, again, what the Italians would call giri, several turns here, the sugo, to make sure the oil and the grease and the guanciale and the remains of the wine are nicely absorbed and mixed. Here, you want to take your sugo off the heat. Leave the heat on the absolute lowest setting, but take it off heat. Then you're going to get your bucatini with the coating of pecorino cheese. And you're going to put the bucatini in there. And you are going to grab, I called this the grabber, it is now the stirrer. What we're going to do is stir this into the sugo, and you note that there is a lot of sugo with respect to the bucatini, and that is on purpose because you want to make sure you have a lot of sauce for this dish. This isn't one of those pasta dishes where you want to skimp. Like if you were making penne arrabbiate, you would want very little sauce. Or if you were making like spaghetti al pomodoro, you don't want to overwhelm it. But with the bucatini amatriciana, because the sauce is where the action is on this dish, you want to make sure it is plentiful and that everybody gets a good helping of it when they sit down at the table. And here is the fruit of our labor, the finished bucatini amatriciana with a little light coating of the pecorino cheese on top. E buon appetito.
So here we go. Now we have wine here. John?
So this is what's called a Frascati Superiore. It's a white wine. Frascati is a small community also in the Lazio region, not far from Amatrice. And the community of Amatrice actually recently got Amatriciana recognized by the European Union as a protected traditional dish. And according to their rules, this is the only wine you were supposed to have with Amatriciana, so we're having it.
And by the way, it's a good time to introduce your lovely wife, Elise. Hello, Elise.
Hello, cheers.
All right, cheers. There's one final bit here when it comes to this meal. Let's do it. Tell me about it.
Elise, what are we about to do?
We are going to do the scarpetta, the little shoe.
And the idea is you take a piece of bread, and it's supposed to act like a little shoe, and we're gonna use it to sop up the remaining sauce in the bowl, because of course this is so good, you don't want even a molecule of it to go to waste. That's the idea.
So
Elias?
if you are at dinner and you don't do the little shoe, is that a slap in the face for the host?
So what happens is if you go to an Italian restaurant and you order Amatriciana, and they serve it to you, and at the end you don't do the scarpetta, then half the time the waiter may come over and ask, wait, was there something wrong? Or if the cook happens to see it, he's going to be outraged. Now, conversely, when you have Italians over to your house and you make an Italian pasta for them, if they whip out the bread at the end of the meal and do the scarpetta, that's like the gold medal, right? It's
the biggest compliment.
It's the greatest compliment they can possibly give.